Okay, shalom everyone, Shavua Tov, Boker Tov. Okay, hi, shalom. Please take your seat. Let's go, okay. Okay, Shavua Tov and Boker Tov to everyone. Our shoot today, as the rest of the series, is dedicated to Ilui Nishmat Rafael Moshe ben Eliyahu. And today we have a very interesting figure, which has, some of our figures are important because of the, you may say, the Torah leadership and the mark they left on the word of Torah, such as the Khatam Sofer we spoke about, and many, many others, just to give one name from recent memory. Others, while also being giants of Torah, not necessarily left such a rich literature, but their life and their acts and the history period in which they were active, in this remark, they are extremely interesting, very teaching, and help us to better understand the world in which we found ourselves nowadays. And Rabbi Rice, which was not born as Rice, he was born as Reis in Germany, but became Rice as he moved to the States. So Rabbi Rice is one of these figures of the second type. As far as I know, he didn't publish anything in writing. He made some articles, he wrote some responsa, but he had never published anything in the form of a book, and not in a book in Hebrew, meaning in rabbinical Hebrew, in something. If I understood correctly, he has some of his writings still resting in archives. Maybe one day they would publish them. But as for now, he's very important, very interesting figure, but as I said, more for his historical role than his specific tshuvot or Torah teachings. But let's begin. So he was born, Avraham Yosef was born in 1800 in Bavaria, Germany. 1800, according to some of the testimonies, it's 1802, but it is easier to calculate if we would take the first approach. So let's say that he was born in 1800 in Bavaria. So Bavaria back then is a state, independent state, because there was still no Germany. It's the beginning of the 19th century, but there is still no Germany. There are different independent states. And one of the strongest of them was Bavaria, which is, they say, I have never been there, but they say it's a very beautiful place. But it may have been very beautiful for the Goyim, not very beautiful for the Eden living there, not because of the forest. The problem was not the forest. The problem was the animals coming down from the forest, if I may say so. So the Jews were living there. As you know, the Jewish settlement in Germany is very ancient, very ancient. It goes 1,000 years long at least, but it takes on and off because the Jews were persecuted outside of Germany. They came back, they were persecuted again, they came back, which is basically the European story. Now, in Bavaria, as we speak about the beginning of the 19th century, there were about 30,000 to 50,000, depends on the exact year and who do you ask, but between 30,000 and 50,000 Jews. That's a very big number. That's a very big number in Bavaria in those times. I think it is the German state with the largest Jewish population. And they were granted nearly zero civil rights. And we are already in the 1800s, so French Revolution already happened, and emancipation process begins, at least in West Europe. But in Bavaria, they are extremely anti-Semitic. If some of you, surprise, you say, yeah, well, yes. Hitler and his gang, obviously we are speaking now 100 years later, but their origins were in Bavaria. So this is the type of people we are speaking about. So Jews are enjoying or not enjoying zero civil rights. And then after a lot of petitions, in 1813, there is a law which gives the Jews fully equal rights, which is beautiful. They are even allowed to buy land in Bavaria. However, there is a condition. And the condition is that only one head of a family is granted these equal rights. And that means that if you are the head of the family in 1813, meaning you are but you are the man, right? So in 1813, you would be allowed to buy lands in Bavaria. Let's say that you have 5 children, and let's say that 3 of them are boys. Only your oldest is allowed to get married. The rest are just not allowed to have their own family. So yeah, that's life. Not allowed to get married because it was in Finland too. Yeah, that's why my grandmother. I didn't know that. That's amazing.
Yeah, the Jewish, they were not allowed to get married.
Allowed to get married. So that's amazing. Now, they were not shy to say that the reason that they put this, that's an amazing, I don't even know what word to use. This terrible law on the law book is because now we are giving rights to the Jews. So what would happen? All the Jews of the world would come to Bavaria. So in order to stop them, that's a very good way to stop the counter on the exact number of Jewish families that we have right now, because you cannot have any new Jewish family. There was even a law that if you do find another head of family leaving Bavaria, then you are allowed to get married, if you exchange a head for a head. So that was the type of things that the Jews in Bavaria had to deal with. So it would come as no great surprise that the Jews just began to leave. Now, there is I say funny because we are living 150 years later, and I guess that we are not suffering it on our own flesh. But there is a petition that was kept in the Bavarian archives, in which a certain important Jew is complaining to the Bavarian government, because of the way that you are behaving to the Jews, then many Jews are leaving and they are going to America, to the States, and it's a great economical force that we are not using and that we are missing. Now the answer more or less was, A, we are very impressed that you can write in German, and that was the answer. So we are very impressed. Yashar koach to you, although you're a Jew, you can write in German. That's nice. And B, I mean, it's not exactly in these words, but basically it was, tell us when they leave and we'd have a nice party. So that was, they were completely not only indifferent to the Jews leaving, they were happy with the Jews leaving. And truth to be told, if all the Jews have been left then, it was better, I guess, for everyone. But be it as it may, we are speaking about thousands upon thousands of Jews, tens of thousands of Jews, leaving Bavaria. Living all over Germany, but especially from Bavaria, and many of them, I apologize, I don't remember I don't think so. He was a Prussian, I think. He was a Prussian king. Yeah, they had a different government. They had I can't remember the name of the ruler there. Ludwig, yeah, man, I apologize, I cannot remember right now. And they left. So many of the Jews, some of them, very few in numbers, there were quite a few that left to Eretz Israel, but that's a very small number. The big number, the great numbers, were either going to Eastern Europe, to Poland, where Jews were still living in more or less in a free state, or many of them were leaving the whole old world and coming to the new world, to the Americas. So some of them to South America, but again, the greatest numbers to the United States. And as a matter of fact, in the history of the Jews in the United States, it is well known that the first Jews in the United States were Portuguese. And then in the beginning of the 19th century, the 19th century, you have a great wave or great waves of immigration of German Jews, of Yekes, what we call them. And they were the ones to build the infrastructure that later was able to receive all of the Jews that came in later years from Russia and later for all of Europe. So the infrastructure was built by these Jews of German origin. Okay, so that is the historical background to the activity of Rabbi Avraham Rice. So he himself, as I said, was born in 1800, and in about the age of 18 months, he fell from a table. I mean, obviously, I cannot explain why did it happen, but he fell from it happens sometimes. He fell from a table, and as a consequence for the rest of his life, he had a limp. So he had a bad leg. He had a limp, which may have affected, as we would try to explain, affected the course of his life. So he had a limp. Okay, fine. And he was also a very smart man and a great Torah scholar. Very quickly, he became a student in some of the best yeshivot in Germany. Now, that is the last period of great traditional yeshivot in Germany. They would be closed very soon. They would be closed very soon. And that is as secularism and even conversion. I didn't know that, but I read yesterday as I prepared the shiur that there was about 10% of German Jews converting to Christianity in the beginning of the 19th century. I found it amazing, but that's it seems to be a reliable source. So, but high percentage converting, high percentage living religion, high percentage becoming reform, having no use of yeshivot. So the yeshivot are in a great decline, but still there are a few going strong. And one of them is the yeshiva of a certain Rav Avraham Bing, which to us does, I guess the name doesn't mean much. He did publish a few of his Chidushei Torah, and he was a great rabbi in Germany. He was the halachic decisor in Germany in the beginning of the 19th century, and he had the yeshiva. And our hero, Rav Avraham Rice, is learning in his yeshiva, in the yeshiva of Rav Bing, and he would keep his contact with Rav Bing and with another rabbi he learned by, called Rabbi Bamberger. So he kept his contact with them for many years to come. He even sent them letters. We'd read one of them when he was already in America. However, he was not able to marry, at least in a young age. And now in Germany is not Poland. So it's not that children are being married at the age of 13, but the age of 20 is deemed as a suitable age to get married. He didn't get married till the age of 35. Back then, it's very unusual. All the accounts I read have it to do with his limp. Now, I'm not sure that that's by itself is a reason enough for someone not to get married. I don't know. However, what it did cause him is to sit in yeshiva for many, many years without having a family, which allowed him to learn very strongly and to become people became Torah scholars with being married, but I guess maybe it was easier somewhat. And so, be it as it may, at the age of 35, he's getting married. And finally, after so many years in yeshiva, he begins to think about parnasa. He needs to make a living. Now, he learned in yeshiva for, 25 years now. So obviously he's going to become a rabbi, and he's very skilled, and he's very knowledgeable, and he's everything. Everything is beautiful, and he's as straight as God make the yekes. So he's really a good man to be a rabbi. And but he cannot be a rabbi in Germany. Because in Germany, in order to become a rabbi now, you must be also a doctor. You cannot be just a rabbi. So the community would not accept you without also having a degree, and also the government would not accept you without having a degree. So it's a closed door. At the beginning, he establishes a yeshiva and he's teaching there, but I told you that is not the greatest time to open a yeshiva in Germany in the beginning of the 19th century. Things are really going downhill, and opening a new yeshiva, he had this yeshiva, I don't know how many people were there. Obviously, he was not making great parnasa, that's for sure. So what do you do? What do you do? He has a friend named Rabbi Yaakov Ettlinger, about whom I hope to speak in the near future. He's known as the Aruch Laner or the Bikurei Yaakov. I mentioned him again, Be'ezrat Hashem, as we continue this shiur. Now, this Rabbi Yaakov Ettlinger says to Rabbi Avraham Rice, to our hero, he says to him, you know, in this new land, in the Golden Medina, as they called it, or the Treif Medina, you know, there are many Jews going there, our Jews, our landsmen, our kin, and there are no rabbis there, no rabbis at all, and they have great spiritual halachic problems that need someone to attend. Maybe you should come there, and you know, it's a bingo, it's good for you, it's good for them. Obviously, you can get some rabbinate position. I mean, there are no competition. You must be able to take some rabbinate position, and you can do great there. I mean, there is really a need. It's very difficult to ascertain to what degree is immigration to the States was because of personal reasons or because of shlichut, that he wanted to help others. I mean, I don't, how can I know? Sometimes we don't know about ourselves. Why do we do things? How can I assess someone that lived 150 years ago? And he has some letters in which he says he came because of shlichut. There are other letters from which it seems otherwise. Anyhow, I guess the two reasons combined. So he's taking off. He has his wife. They have one child, and his sister also coming with them. His sister also coming with them, and they are boarding a ship and going to America. Now, where do you land in America? So in the last 100 years, the answer would be always Ellis Island. That's right. And then New York, and that's how you get 3 million or 4 million Jews in New York, right? Because everyone comes there, and after you came there, why to go on? But back then, many of the German Jews didn't come to Ellis Island. They came to Baltimore. And the reason was because there was a ship line going directly from Hamburg, thank you, from Hamburg to Baltimore. And many times when there would not be enough goods in order to cover the expense of the journey, the captain of the ship would take passengers. So Jews would come to Hamburg, and when there would be available place on the spots on the ship, they would board the ship and go to Baltimore. So he is coming to Baltimore. Now, the journey itself was horrible. We have some accounts. There was not enough food because it seems that the captain was just uploading passengers in order, again, to get the tickets, but not necessarily took care that there would be enough food for everyone. Plus, some of the food got spoiled on the way. In addition, the Jews that wanted to keep kashrut had to begin with very little to have. The situation was so severe that Rabbi Rice gave a psak to the Jews on the ship that they are allowed to eat on 17 B'Tammuz because they were so weak, because they ate so little every day. He said if we would not eat even this meager amount of food, then who knows what would happen. And people, I guess people were vomiting and sheep. It was very, very bad. We know that some people lost their lives in the specific journey. So after all of that, we are not speaking about a cruise, right? We have to understand what we speak about when we speak about these journeys from Europe to America. And then he reaches Baltimore. And what does he do? He goes to New York. It's what it is. He goes, well, now why should he go? Why should he go? He doesn't go exactly to New York. He goes to Rhode Island. Why does he think that he should go to Rhode Island? Because in Rhode Island, there is the first shul in colonial America, which is in Newport. So he's going to the Anshe Newport shul, and he wants to become the rabbi there, because back in Germany, it takes time for news, it's not Google. So it takes time for news to reach. So for him, what he knows is that there was this guy, it was Washington, right? George Washington, that visited the people of Newport in their shul and told them that they would enjoy equal rights as all the other people in the United States, obviously if you're white, and they can, and they not only on suffrage but on right, they could be in the States. So he wants to go there and be the rabbi of this historic shul. But when he comes to the shul, unfortunately, there is hardly a minyan. So he is taking the position for some time, and he's trying to rejuvenate and to revive the community there, but it's a lost case. There are just not enough Jews identifying as Jews in this time in Rhode Island. And he is raising his hands, and he's now going to New York proper. What would he do in New York? He has no idea. So he's out of work, and we speak about the United States of the beginning of the 19th century. So that is the paradise or hell of capitalism. If you make money, then you keep it and you enjoy it. If you don't make money, you can die on the street. There is no social security. There is no nothing. No nothing. You are on your own. So for many Jews, that was their golden opportunity, because they came from places in which they were not able to express their, anti-yazamut, anti-upership. I wouldn't be able to pronounce this word. Yes, exactly. So they were stiffed for so long, and now they came to America, and they were able, and you know what Jews were doing usually. So they would come down the ship, they would buy some pencils and some jars or something, cups, and begin to pedal. And you'd pedal, you'd just walk and walk. You'd come without family. Most of them came without families. 20 years old guys, sometimes even younger, and they would come to this Golden State, and they will begin to pedal. So you buy for half a penny, and you sell for a penny, and then you buy again, and you sell again. And after a few years, if you played your cards right, and many of them did, many of these German Jews did very, very well. So you open a general store. That was a very good Jewish occupation, opening general stores. So almost in every city, you had a general store owned by a Jew. Something was even called the Jewish store. And you had a Jew running the general store. So instead of peddling, they would come to you. It's a beautiful idea. So you sit in the store and people come. And now we are not speaking here about one of them would become a Macy's, right? But 99% would just remain, your small convenience store. It's not easy life, but it is much better than what was going on in Germany, or for that matter, in all of Europe. But it is very bad for Yahadut, because the Jews, as I said, first, there was a great disparity between men and women, because mostly came to the States young Jewish men. Now, what was the idea? What was the plan? The plan basically was, I am so successful, I am so skilled. I would come, after 5-6 years, I would save enough money so I'd be able to travel back, marry someone because I'm so rich, and then return with her to the United States, where I already built a home and would be able to begin our life together. I don't know how many were able to execute this dream, but not too many. Because they came, and it's not that 5 years and you own a store and you own a house, and most of them after 5 years were not really able to pay the ticket back, let alone marry someone and bring her back to the States. So they stayed for 7-10 years. Now the years go by. Would you wait forever for the Jewish princess living back there in Europe? You don't even remember how the Jewish princess looks like, right? So you do it with what there is. You are a good Jew, you want to convert her. Let's say that you are going to marry a non-Jew. You're a good Jew, you want to convert her. Who exactly would supervise this conversion? How many Rabbanim are there, ordained Rabbanim, are there in North America? That's a very easy answer. You need no fingers in order to answer it. There are zero. It's an amazing number because you already have tens of thousands of Jews running around. Zero Rabbanim. Now, there were people that presented themselves as Rabbanim, that gave sikot, that shachted animals. I don't know what they did with the animals. They shachted animals. They wrote Gittin. Not one of them was ordained by an ordained rabbi of the earlier generation. They just came in, they put whatever hat, right? So they had the rabbinic hat, they put the rabbinic hat on them, and they just went along and said what they wanted. And again, there is no, in Europe, where things are very hierarchical, if you present yourself as a rabbi and the state does not acknowledge you as a rabbi, they can jail you for that. But back then in America, and I guess that even now, you can call yourself whatever you want. You want to call yourself a rabbi, call yourself a rabbi. And today you are a rabbi, tomorrow you'll be a reverend, next day you'll be a bishop. Who cares? You can call yourself whatever you want. And that's exactly what they did. It's exactly what they did. So the land was full of charlatans, and not one real rabbi to call this show off. And again, so how do you convert? So either you convert her in some fake bait. Even the charlatans didn't establish Batei Dinim. That was, I guess, it was deemed too too ridiculous. So you did something, or you did nothing. Just marry her, and that was the end of the story. That happened many times. Now I say nothing about kashrut. I say nothing about Shabbat. How exactly do you keep Shabbat when you pedal? Now, I'm not blaming anyone because that's a hard nisayon. But how do you keep Shabbat? You began your pedaling. Now you are going. Now you came to some city. There are no Jews in the city, or at least no Jews observing Shabbat. Now what do you do? How exactly? So you'd keep it for 1 week, for 2 weeks. Most of them lost it after a few weeks. Not too long, few weeks. Most of them, we have to remember, they didn't have good Jewish education. Because if you had good Jewish education, you didn't go to America. Most of them had very basic knowledge. Now, it was good enough if you stayed in your little town in Bavaria or in Prussia or in this type of place. It was good enough. You saw how your father kept the Shabbat. You saw how your mother kept a kashrut, and you just mimicked. And it worked very nice. But the problem with mimic is that when you come to a new situation, the old tradition cannot work. So you really have to ask a sheila. But who would you ask? There are no rabbanim. So you can write a question. Yeah, there was a telegraph. So you can telegraph your question, but no one did that. No one did that. So that was the situation in the States. Very, very, very sad. And Rabbi Rice is going in, and he's now in New York, and he is out of work, out of money. He has a wife. I do believe that the child died more or less at the same time. I'm not completely sure about the date in which he died, but I think that it was around this time. So that is his situation. That is the situation, and there is nothing. I mean, it's a desolation around him, spiritually speaking. Now comes one of his landsmen from Baltimore. He came to New York on a business trip, and he says to him, "You know, we have a big shul that we are building now in Baltimore for our people, right? For our landsmen, for Bavarian Jews, and we do want to have a more traditional setting. Let's call it that way." And we would like to have a rabbi, because in Germany we have rabbis. So we need a rabbi, and you're a rabbi. Would you come to be our rabbi? And you know, how many alternatives does he have? So, okay, Baltimore it is. But Baltimore was a big Jewish, to this day, it's a big Jewish community. But back then, I think it was maybe the second large Jewish community in the States. And so he's going there. He is going to Baltimore, to a shul named Nidachei Israel. Nidachei Israel. And he's becoming the rabbi of the shul. Immediately, as you can imagine now, I didn't speak about his personality up till now. He learned by Rabbi Bing. Rabbi Bing himself was a student of the Khatam Sofer. So we are speaking about hardcore traditionalists, if we may say so. Shamranim, conservatives, but with a small c, obviously. Right? So a small c conservative and a very staunch one, and a very strong defender of orthodox, what would later be known as orthodoxy. So that's a type of man, and as I said, I apologize for using the stigmas, but he's playing so nice into them. He's such a yek. He's a very straight man. He would call a spade, right? If he sees you and he doesn't like your haircut, he'll tell it in your face. That's the type of a person. He's a very straightforward man, and he became now a rabbi of this shul. Now, what do you need as a rabbi of a shul? Truth is always and everywhere, but especially in the United States in the beginning of the 19th century. You need to be a diplomat, right? You need to know when to rebuke, when not to rebuke, how to handle the people. He would have nothing of that. So he immediately entered into a number of machloktim, of disputes, of fights. So one of them was about shchita, because as you can imagine, shchita was in a terrible state, and the shochatim knew nothing from the right and the left, and there was no minhag, and there was no tradition. Some of them came from Germany, but people were banned. One of the stories was that he came into a fight with a butcher, with a shochet, with a slaughter, that was he was banned to slaughter in Germany. So what did he do? Took his family, moved to the States, and began to be shochten there. And Rabbi Rice called him out, and you can imagine that he was not happy to abandon his work. So they got into real fights. And there was in the States, there was, for some reason, they had this, I don't know if you want to call it a minhag, this practice that they would poke the animal before the shchita to draw blood, because it was considered that the meat is tastier if you took out some of the blood before the shchita. I have no knowledge in meat or in anything, but that was the practice back then. But the problem is obviously that if you poke the animal too hard, then it becomes a treif, right? That's so you are shachtening a treif animal, even if it was kosher up till now. So he wanted to ban this minhag. The shochatim didn't want to ban the minhag because they can sell it easier and maybe more expensive if they poke the animal before. Great wars, because that is not Europe. In Europe, the shchita is in the hands of the community. You can just dispose of a shochet you're not happy with. That is not the situation in the United States. It's a hefker country. Everyone can do whatever he wants. I am a shochet. You say you are a rabbi. It's very nice. Don't interfere with my work. There is no reason why I should listen to you. So the only power of the rabbi under such settings is if the people, the congregation, would listen to him. Surprise, surprise. They are not going to listen if they are not happy. And that's just, you have to get used to it. And if you come from a place like Germany, then it's a different world. It's very difficult for some people to get used to that they speak and okay, people sit there in the shul. People are very respectful. He gave very long drashot, I can say that, because we have some of them. So the sermons were very long, but I think that was the fashion back then, that an hour and a half a drasha. So people would sit and he would speak. He spoke German, by the way. So he would speak German. I'm sure that he was able to speak Yiddish as well, but they were not interested to listen in Yiddish. So he would speak in German, and they would sit and learn and listen. And he would speak about Chilul Shabbat, and they would sit and listen, to be very respectful, and they would go out to the general store and open it. That was the situation. So it was shchita. By the way, matzah mechona, machine matzah. So obviously that was the beginning. He was the one, as far as I was able to ascertain, he was the one to introduce machine matzah to the United States. Not only that he allowed it, it was a big machloket. Not only that he allowed it, he helped to create the first factory of machine matzah in Baltimore. So very interesting. He doesn't write it down, but I imagine that he relied more halachically, felt more secured with the machine than with the people that he had there to bake the matzah. I'm almost sure that was his reasoning. So machine matzah. There was a very interesting dispute he had regarding etrogim. So that's a beautiful story. I'll try to make it quick. A beautiful story. So how do you get etrogim in America? So etrogim can go in the West Indies. In the West Indies, there are etrog trees. Beautiful. Now, not only that they grow, they are beautiful, at least according to what they write, they are beautiful etrogim. Now, not only that Rabbi Rice had this beautiful etrogim for his congregation, he thought maybe we can also export to Europe, because in Europe there was a great lacking in etrogim. So maybe you can send some etrogim. Now his friend, the Aruch Laner, Rabbi Yaakov Ettlinger, the one that sent him to America, he opposed the etrogim of the West Indies. And he had two reasons. One is, he said, we cannot be sure that they will never have been grafted. Thank you. Maybe they were grafted with other trees. Okay, we don't have a Masorah about these trees. Fine, that was the first reasoning. They were wild etrog trees. It was very difficult to believe that someone grafted them and they then sent them to the jungle to grow. But maybe, okay. His second reason was very interesting. He said, you know that when we take the etrog, so it needs to be in a certain order. It needs to be in the same way it grows on the tree. In Hebrew, it's called kederech gedilato, in the way it grew. And you know that in the bracha, we take it in upside down, and then after the bracha, we immediately turn it upside up, I guess. Now, said Rabbi Yaakov Ettlinger, we know that the world is round, right? So for us living in Germany, the way this etrog grows, you see where it's going. The way this etrog grows is upside down. So we cannot take this etrog, because if we take it and we need to take it in Germany, in the way that it grew, we would have to hold it upside down. So he didn't want to have the etrogim imported to Germany, and basically he and other Rabbanim were able to block the etrogim coming from the West Indies, but it created a very interesting exchange of letters, because Rav Rice wanted to defend his etrogim. So he said, no, you do not relate to the axis of the earth. I don't know even what to say. So no, it's every place according to the place it grew, and then if in the place it grew it was upside up, then it's fine everywhere else as well. So it's an interesting machloket that they had back then. And again, I don't think that in America nowadays they have this West Indies etrogim. I think that when the more Machmirim people came in, they remembered that the West Indies etrogim were banned in Europe, so they wanted the etrogim from Europe imported, and the ships were better, so you could import more easily, because again, if you have a 2 months journey in the sea, the fruits are not going to make it. If it's much shorter, and especially if you begin to have some refrigerators working, then it's a whole different story, and then you can really import from place to place. So that was the dispute about the etrogim. But what really did in was the Aliyot LaTorah, as always. What about the Aliyah LaTorah, the laning? So he was, as I said, he was really shocked that people are breaking the Shabbat. So he issued a ruling that anyone breaking the Shabbat in public would not get Aliyah in Shul. Now, this ruling was not necessarily so outlandish 200 years before. So 200 or 100 years before, that is correct. People that were, we call it Mechalelei Shabbat Befaresia, people that break the Shabbat in public, meaning in front of other Jews, they disgrace the Shabbat, they are, I apologize for the term, but they are speaking in the face of Yahadut and of Torah and of Halacha and of heaven, God forbid. So yes, they were considered almost half Jews, maybe less. and of course they would not get Aliyah, La Torah. So he thought that if we would tell them that they are not getting Aliyot, they would stop breaking the Shabbat. But you all know what happened. They just stopped getting Aliyot. Now the problem, that's in itself maybe not so bad, but the problem was that about 90% of his shul were people that are Mechalei Shabbat. And what is even worse is that the financial model that the shul was working on is that everyone that gets Aliyah donates money to the shul. So now you have about 10 people that can make Aliyah, and they have to finance the whole thing. So people are maybe not so sad about not getting Aliyot. They were sitting in their places and listening to how much you would contribute this week, this Shabbat. So that was a complete failure. The Gabbaim came to him, the board of directors came to him, and they said, we are sorry. You must give Aliyot to this Mechalelei Shabbat. That's what life are. And by the way, we are also Mechalei Shabbat. That's the way it was. That's the way it was. And Rabbi Rice was dragged, screaming, because he was, as I said, he was a staunch defender. In the end, he said, they can get Aliyah, but no one should say Amen after their bracha. That was the ruling that he issued to his shul, which is amazing. Again, as I said, that's not very diplomatic, right? You do not gain friends and influence by relating to people in this way. And he was who he was. He was who he was. But no one could say anything about his yashut. As you can understand, he was a very straight man. And no one could say anything. But because he said what he thought, and he didn't go behind anyone's back, and he didn't, there is a Gemara saying, Rabbi Yossi says, I never said something and looked back. Why? Because I was never ashamed or shy from something that I said. Everything that I say in private, I can also say in public. That was the type of man that Rav Rice was, but it is not necessarily the best type to serve as a pulpit rabbi. That's, again, we have to acknowledge that. Yeah, it's sad. The result of this dispute with his people of the shul was that some, I don't know numbers, but a group of them abandoned the shul and created a new shul, which was called Har Sinai, which is a very cynical name. So they called it Har Sinai, and Har Sinai became the first lasting Reform temple in the United States. So he created the first real Orthodox shul, but also, as it must be Jews, right? But when you create the first real Orthodox shul, you automatically also create the first real Reform shul, also in Baltimore. And it was headed by no other than one David Einhorn, who was his buddy friend from the yeshiva back in Bavaria, in Rabbi Bink's yeshiva. So here they are, these two, one Rav, the other, call him whatever you want. He called him a doctor. Doctor. So, and they are both running some of the big shows now in the States. And one is Orthodox, one is Reform. And they are always waging wars on one another. So there are these Jewish newspapers, the Occident, and the Jewish Messenger or Advent or something like that. I mean, you can find everything is online now if you want to read some very old English, Victorian English from 90s. I spent some hours yesterday night, which was, I didn't bring a source page because reading it myself, I thought would be too embarrassing, but you can find it, it's all online for free. And they were, so Einhorn, as time passed by, he became more and more Reform. So he was shelling all beliefs, all Orthodox tenets. Everything was thrown. So some of it was thrown already on the ship to the States, but now all the rest was also being peeled off. And he said he wrote as a public letter to Rabbi Rice, he said, how can you say that a Jew that does not believe At first they spoke about Chilul Shabbat because that was what caused the rift. But then Rabbi Rice said, of course you have to keep Shabbat the way that I said that you have to keep Shabbat, because that's the way it's written in the Talmud. So Rabbi Heinoren asked him, do you say that if I do not believe in the divinity and authority of the Talmud, I am not a good Jew? And as you can imagine, the next letter of Rabbi Rice said, yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. If you do not accept the authority of the Talmud, you are not a good Jew. And he adds to that, maybe you remember that in Daniel's revelation, one of the dreams of Daniel, he says he saw an animal, a brute, coming from the sea, and it has 10 horns. And all the 10 were broken. And then he says, if we were able to overcome 10 horns, we can obviously overcome one horn, which is a play on the name of Einhorn. So that's the, yeah, so it was, yeah, that's the type of things that were going on. But it was signing the letters, your friend, always. Because they learned the yeshiva together. So you would sign your friend, Avraham Rice. Now, he was doing his best. He was really doing his best. He understood that the real problem is chinuch, and he tried to establish a day school, but it failed. He didn't have enough students. So I guess that he was not able to convince enough parents that that's what they should do. And that is very sad. That is very sad, because if you do not give your children good, proper Jewish education, then again, people coming from the old world thought that it is enough to see what the parents are doing at home and they would carry on. It is not working that way in the modern world. We have been hit with that one and twice and 3 times everywhere in Europe and in Israel and in the United States. It just doesn't work like that anymore. If you do not, because the modern world is installing is the lines dividing between communities, the Jewish community and the Gentile community, has been erased to a large degree. And because that culture is becoming much stronger in the modern world. And because there is much more emphasis on knowledge. When people used to work with their heads, now more and more of them are working with their heads. If you do not give them in their heads something Jewish and something that is substantial, it wouldn't hold water. And now, obviously, some people can go without Jewish education, be very good Jews. I'm not speaking about individuals, but if you speak about how do you keep your youth in the fold, it cannot happen without proper Jewish education. I'm saying that it's also an ideology, but I'm not saying it here as an ideology. Just I think as a very simple observation from recent 200 years history. So he understood it to a degree, but he was just not a type of person. So after all of that, in 1849, he went to a levaya that he was supposed to officiate of a certain person from his congregation. But the person was also a member in the Freemasons and in something called the Odd Fellows order. And they had their own rites of kevura. So, I don't know if kevura is the right word. So he came there and they began to practice their own customs. And he was aghast and he said, no, that's a chilul hakodesh and you must stop that. And the people just couldn't understand, why are you making so much noise? Just wait till your turn. And they would do their things and then you do your thing. What is the problem? The member was, in the end, he was both a member of the Freemasons and a member of the Odd Fellows and a member of the shul. So what's the problem is? So he should have all 3 levayot. That broke him. It just broke him because he didn't have the backup of the community to force his will. And he said, I would not officiate in such a levaya. He came back home, and the next day he gave his resignation letter to the Vad. Now it's interesting. The Vad didn't want him to leave. They were very happy with a rabbi rebuking them about Yahadut and doing nothing about it. It felt for them just the natural way things should be. But But he couldn't stand it anymore because again, he was a Yashar man. I think he didn't want to take money if he felt that his work is coming to vain. So he said, oh, it's amazing. Now, it's not that he resigned from trying to help and guide the people, but he said, I would be able to do more if I would become rich, and then I would become one of the important balei batim, sitting on the board, and from the board I would be able to do more than from the pulpit. There is only one hole in this theory, and that you have to become rich. So it's not as simple as the plan. He opened a textile store, but again, it's very difficult to be very good in business if you are you're so straight. And I mean, it didn't work. The bottom line is that it didn't work. His wife had very difficult life, as you can imagine. They adopted a son, and his descendants are still with us today. Some of them are Rice and identify themselves as Rice in the United States. He wrote a letter to one of his rabbis back in Europe, and the letter is in Germany. It's in German, excuse me, but we have an English translation. I'll read some sentences but it reflects the situation that he had found himself in. I dwell in complete isolation, without a teacher or a companion in this land, whose atmosphere is not conducive to wisdom. All religious questions, shelos, are brought to me for solution. I have to carry the full load on my shoulders and have to assume the authority to render decisions in halachic questions in both private and public matters. So he says, people continue to ask him questions because there was no other rabbi. I mean, they put someone there, he could give sermons, I guess, but how many shasim there were in the whole of the United States? It's an interesting question. In the beginning of the 19th century, a very small number. A very small. With Jews coming in did not brought the Gemara with them. So there were not even books. No, he was sitting there. Now again, he was a Gaon. He was a genius. He was a great, real Talmid Chacham. He had much stored in his head. But how much can you carry? And you have to render these decisions. And that's a lot of it's a lot of responsibility. There are Aguna questions, there are Gittin questions. They are very difficult questions, and there is no one to consult with. And he says, my soul weeps in the dark that the character of religious life in this land is on the lowest level. Most of the people are eating non-kosher food, are violating the Shabbat in public. There are thousands who have assimilated among the non-Jewish population and have married non-Jewish women. You spoke about that, by these young peddlers coming in, and we just lose them. Under these circumstances, my mind is perplexed, and I wonder whatever a Jew may even live in a land such as this. But the whole thing is asur. I need to go back to Europe. And he says, for oftentimes I have made up my mind to leave and go from here to Paris and to put my trust in the good Lord. I don't know what you'd find in Paris back then, but I'm afraid that's also a slightly too romanticized view on the old country. I don't think that the old country was as he remembered it in the 1860s. Certainly not places like Paris. But that's how he felt. That's a tragedy. It's really a tragedy because he was a great man, and living 200 years before, I am sure that he would have become one of the Talmidei Chachamim. But he found himself in complete isolation. Now, he was, after the school failed, he became like a private teacher. So before Bar Mitzvah, he was teaching children. It made him sick because he felt that he's not really able to touch these children. They just need him for Bar Mitzvah, I would say. And he had health problems throughout all of his life, and they tell me that Baltimore is not the greatest city from climate consideration. So he became sick. He felt that he is not able to teach the children, but he had no other choice because how he would make money. I mean, he abandoned all dreams about becoming rich, but just getting by. There is no pension, by the way, in 19th century United States. So you have to work till you die, or you are able to save enough money, but most of the people would not save enough money. So you would have to work till you die. what he's going to do. Now, all the time, he is putting his mind to work on how to better the Jewish situation in the States. He is contacting a man named Isaac Lesser. He's supposed to be a well-known man. He was not a Rav, he was a Balabait, but he was a very active Balabait. He was an Askan, we would say today, right? And he was the one that published this newspaper, this Jewish newspaper. And he told him, we must have a Jewish English Bible, because many of the children are not able to read Hebrew. That's a fact. Now they use translations. What English translation do you have of the Bible? Christian ones. So they fall easy prey. So he says to this Lezer, he says, you have a good English. I don't have a good English, I'm a German. But you have good English, translate the Bible into English, Jewish English. And Lesser is doing that. And for many decades, I think till Hertz translated his own translation, for many decades, that was the Chumash that they were using in the United States. And that was the work of Rabbi Rice. So he did very important work. But he was, in Hebrew we say, a kol koreh bamidbar. He was a lonely voice in the desert. And it is very different. Now, he had a personality, a very strong personality. He would not give up, but it ate his health. It ate his health. And he opened a private minyan at his home, in which the condition you didn't need to pay any money. There was only one condition. You must be full. You must keep Shabbat in order to be a member. Don't have to pay anything. Everything was on Rabbi Rice. And he had barely a minyan, but this shul survived to this day. It's called the Sherit Israel, and it's one of the only shuls in the whole of the United States that never went either conservative or reform. And back from, I am not speaking from the 70s, but back from the 800s, that remain Orthodox to this day. It's one of the only ones. So that's the figure of Rabbi Rice. Now, in 1862, if some of you know American history, it's a very important year. Okay, so the beginning of the Civil War. And in 1862, the shul needs a rabbi that won't speak politics. That's what's most important, because politics are very dividing. They don't want a division around politics. Baltimore, Maryland, that's a central state. It's not belong to the north. It does not belong to the south. So you have people from both sides. You want to steer your ship quietly. By the way, the guy Ein Horen was an advocate against slavery, and he had to leave town. But in Nidchei Israel, right, the first shul of Rabbi Rice, they needed a rabbi that would speak only Yahadut and not politics. So they knew who they have to turn to. They came to Rabbi Rice and they told him, we want you back. We would accept any condition you have. So no Mechalei Shabbat going to Liyal Torah, no anything. You can keep your own shul at your home. It was one of the conditions, because he had tefillot also in the weekdays. They don't have tefillot in the weekdays. Who can come and witness the tefillot? So you can keep your own private shul. Just come and be our rabbi. He agreed. And this Yamim Noraim, he gave a sermon in shul. But unfortunately, he died immediately after. There was a pandemic. Baltimore, because many ships were coming in, when you have a port city, then there are pandemics coming all the time. And they didn't know how to sterilize it. The whole thing was much beyond. And one of these waves of pandemic, he and his wife passed away. And that was just a few months after he was re-given the position of a rabbi in Nidchei Israel. So now it gets even worse, because a few years after he died, Nidchei Israel went fully reform, and they put an organ inside to play on Shabbat. And even his descendants in these first generations left religion. So, but we can finish here, and it would be a real tragedy. But the shul that I mentioned earlier remain active throughout these very difficult years. And And in the end, it did cause Baltimore to have some more orthodox color in the beginning of the 20th century. And that was very important because when a very important rabbi wanted to open what would become a very important yeshiva, that is Rabbi Ruderman opening Ner Israel in Baltimore. Maybe some of you are familiar. In the States, it's a very important yeshiva. One of the reasons why it chose Baltimore was because in Baltimore, you had a good infrastructure of Orthodox families. And the reason to that was because the work of Rabbi Rice, some 50 or 60 years period to that. So we may say that although maybe much of what he wanted to achieve, he was not able to, not because of his own fault, because the conditions were such that you need to be a Superman in order to achieve anything. But nonetheless, his work was not completely for vain, because this yeshiva, after being opened, revived the Orthodox community in Baltimore. Nowadays, I don't know the numbers, but I guess there are tens of thousands. Very big. Yeah, but not in Rabbi Price time. No, but after that. But the reason why they chose Baltimore, I mean, ships were not the reason anymore. The reason was because there was some infrastructure that was put in place by Rabbi Price. So we can say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu never let the work of a tzaddik go completely in vain. And for us, the message I think that we can receive from that is that one should never completely disappear. Even in a very difficult situation, you plant the seeds and you never know, maybe 50, 60, 70 years later, they would bear fruit. Thank you so much. And Be'ezrat Hashem will continue next week.
Just so you know, our sign out.
Thank you.
Mount Sinai become an Orthodox yeshiva. The Einhorn, beautiful. I didn't know that. I didn't know that. You're from Baltimore. Beautiful. Beautiful. In Baltimore, do they remember the name of Price? Is it the name that is being... No.
I know people from Muncie named Rice.
Mm-hmm.
Family Rice.
No, but I don't know if they are related. I don't know.
I know they're doing that.
Right. He was raised in Europe and he became Rice. He Americanized his name.
This family that I know of, they're Yankees.
Yeah.